I've come up here to the Ashton Bridge because I think this provides a good picture of some aspects of faith, particularly in relation to the first part of Luke's Gospel. And the first thing I want to say is that the bridge provides a really good viewpoint. Because it's high up, you get to stand there where you couldn't otherwise stand, right above the Clyde, I don't know, dozens of metres up. And I came this morning to stand there and watch the sunrise, and it was great. And I saw the sun reflect off the Clyde, and it was calm and peaceful and wonderful. Well, I say it was calm and peaceful, but in truth the traffic was roaring behind me, and I've come down here to the country park which sits just below the bridge in order to be able to record the sound without too much noise of the traffic in the background. But one of the things which is important for me about the image of the bridge is the fact that it's a viewpoint which has been made by goodness knows how many people who have planned and designed it, who have built it, who continue to maintain it, so that I can stand there and take pictures, and so the traffic can travel back and forwards across the bridge. It's a real collective effort, and I think that's a good picture for church, which is entirely a collective effort. Theophilus, the reader of Luke's Gospel, only gets to read this because Luke has written it, has produced in his own words this orderly account. But in turn, Luke was only able to produce this orderly account by speaking to eyewitnesses, by talking to those who handed down the stories, who saw what happened for themselves. So the suggestion there is that Luke didn't see all of this, not directly. He spoke to people who had seen it and he gathered the evidence. That's probably more important than that he had seen it all for himself, because it means that he can get different perspectives and different viewpoints and can join these together as he writes his gospel. And that might be an important thing for us, to recognise that faith is not a single viewpoint kind of approach. It allows different people to have different thoughts, different ideas, different perspectives, and to contribute these together in order that all of our faith might all be made the richer. It really is a community and a combined effort. And that's in part why I think it's not possible to be a solitary Christian. One Christian, as John Westerhoff has said, equals no Christian, because we were made to be together. That's for a whole range of reasons, that we can express care and love directly when we're actually engaging with people. But in terms of our understanding, it's that we together build the standpoints or the viewpoints from which we see things. And that's why I'm particularly excited that in Orchard Hill over the past while, we have gained some experience and practice and even some confidence in being able to share what we think. The little videos which we did at Christmas time, the Advent calendar online for people to watch, was, I think, a real way of helping us to see that we have something to say that's worth listening to, and that when we share that together, we all learn more. So I do want to encourage you that it is a really important part of what it means to follow Jesus. It's precisely what Luke did. He gathered the facts together, he wrote them down in some kind of orderly account, and he shared them. And it is that sharing of our understanding as well as that sharing of our life which matters deeply. We believe in, as it were, collective viewpoints. It's not that we come to church in order to say, I think this, or I see it that way. It is that we come to church to share our views and our understandings in order that our viewpoint might be made that bit richer. I think that's what Luke is doing as he gathers material together for this gospel. He doesn't just base things on his own understanding or his own experience, but that matters. He also listens to what other people have to say, and he makes the effort to go and find that out in order that he can share it with his audience, with this reader, Theophilus. I think the name Theophilus is just too neat to be true. It means one who loves God, and it might have been the case that Luke did have a friend who was interested in finding more out about Jesus, who was called someone who loves God or who wants to love God. But as I say, I think that's just a bit too neat. I suspect that Luke was writing this gospel and he did have Theophilus in mind, but Theophilus wasn't an individual, or at least wasn't a particular individual. Theophilus was anyone who loved God or who wanted to love God a bit more. And so Luke writes this gospel, this account of Jesus' life, in order that people who do understand a little bit about Jesus might find out more, so that those who do love Jesus a bit might come to love him increasingly. And I am sure that's why Theophilus is mentioned right at the start, both of the Gospel of Luke and also the second volume in Acts. Theophilus is someone who loves God, and therefore Luke is writing to us. If he were only writing to his friend back in the years after Jesus had lived and died and risen again, I think we might be justified in thinking that the book was only of limited relevance to us, but it's not, because Luke is writing, as people throughout the generations have found, to encourage the faith of those who love God a bit and who want to love God more. Luke says that he writes this account in order that Theophilus, his reader, might have some certainty. How far is faith based on certainty? Well, there are different ways of looking at that. We can be too certain, we can be too confident about things perhaps, and that might make for a brittle faith, so that if things don't work out the way we anticipated they should, we feel that everything has gone wrong. Or it might be that faith gives us the kind of certainty in the sense that the Erskine Bridge is a solid viewpoint from which to stand. There are principles which Luke speaks of, which through the years people, mainly Christians but not only them, have found deeply valuable in showing them how they might live life. Issues of integrity, generosity, love, care, compassion for the other, in particular a recognition for those who are weaker and poorer and less highly regarded. Many in our world today think that these are key principles which need to be put into practice much more frequently than they are. The world is not simply a dog-eat-dog kind of place where it's the survival of the richest or the fittest or the strongest or even the most devious. The world doesn't work like that, and a Christian viewpoint says that love matters, that concern and compassion should be spread widely, that God has made all people in God's image, and therefore that all people are inherently valuable to God. These are things which matter to us, and they are standpoints for our perspective on life, and they offer us a certainty. I think too, though, that there is a historical certainty which Luke wants us to know. He wants us definitely to know that there was such a person as Jesus, and he wants us to know that the kind of things which Jesus taught are the kind of things which we read of in this gospel. The historic facts of Jesus living and teaching and dying and being raised again. These are things which Luke stands on, and they are things which he offers Theophilus, his reader, as certainties for his faith. We struggle sometimes to understand how these things can be, and at other times we make even more difficulties as we read the text and pick it apart. But there are certainties which we need to hold onto. There are things which we need to be sure about in order that we might be able to explore our faith more fully. And I want to encourage you that as we read this gospel over these coming weeks, we can rely on what Luke is telling us in order that we might trust the Jesus about whom Luke tells us that we might discover in this Christ life and principles for living, which are immensely rich, not only for us, but for the communities in which we live as we put these into practice, and indeed for the whole world as we seek to bring God's kingdom to bear throughout the whole earth. It's interesting that in Luke's Gospel, one of the features is the activity of Jesus, and not least that Jesus helps people out. There's a range of stories of Jesus healing people, and I think for Luke, who tradition tells us was a doctor, that's important. People matter. People's bodies and their physical health and their mental well-being, they all matter to God, and therefore they matter to Luke as he writes this gospel. Let's not overlook our real lives. Let's not over-spiritualize the world in which we live. Let's not look too much to be heavenly minded and less earthly good, but let's use our heavenly mindedness, our desire to follow God, in order that we might be more earthly good. And maybe we should see in the lives that we live, in the work that you do, in your home, in the office, at the hospital, at school, wherever it is you find yourself, do we recognise that to service to God as we offer real care and compassion in the way we deal with people all over the place and all through the day. The other thing I would say about the bridge is that while you can stand at different points on it and you do see slightly different things, as I watched this morning, it was the same sun that was rising that anyone watching the sunrise this morning or any morning would have seen. Sometimes it's too easy to be caught up in our different viewpoints. Of course, we see things slightly different from different perspectives and at different times through our lives. But we're looking at the same sunrise, and in Jesus we are looking at the same Son of God. We see him differently because we come to him with all sorts of life experiences. That's entirely right. But Luke has provided what he calls this reliable account, this orderly way of seeing things so that we might understand what Jesus is saying to us today in a world which is very different from the one in which Luke was writing, and yet one in which people are very much the same, where their needs and their hopes have not changed all that much, where their dreams and their visions can still be as strong and exciting and radical as they were back in Luke's day, as they were back in Jesus' day. Luke offers us an insight into the life of Christ that we might invite this life of Christ in us to gain insight to live, to gain strength to live, to have companionship with one another, and not least with the risen Christ, that we might live well and that we might share in action and in words the kind of life which God calls us as people who are made in his image and who are brought into his kingdom as he calls us to live. That's the promise, the offer, if you like, the invitation which Luke makes to us in this gospel, and it's there for us that we might become his reader, and in becoming his reader, Theophilus, we might become people who love God more and more, and who put that into practice by sharing practical love and real care with those around us, particularly those who are least well regarded, but also that we don't neglect the spiritual side of our lives, and that we take time to love God more with our heart and soul, with our mind and strength, just as Jesus commanded, that we might know the love of God in our lives, and that knowing that, we might live well for God. So I hope you're encouraged to have a look at this gospel, perhaps to read it with fresh eyes, to read it all the way through, or to read some parts of it in some detail, in order that you might glean fresh insight. And I do very much hope that you won't keep that to yourself, that you will offer your viewpoints, that they might be standpoints for other people to see God and to see God's activity in the world for themselves in a fresh and in a new way, so that together we might grow in faith and grow in love and grow in service, that we might today be people of the way, following Jesus, living for God and bringing his kingdom in. May God bless us all as we continue to follow him through Christ our Lord. Amen.